The Untold Story of Charlie Chaplin's 11 Children. The silent star who spoke through his children. Charlie Chaplin. The name alone evokes 1,000 images. The bowler hat tilted just so, the cane spinning like a magician's wand, the oversized shoes carrying a gentle tramp through the dust of silent streets. He was more than a comedian. He was a symbol of resilience, of mischief, of humanity itself. For millions, Chaplin represented hope in an age of hardship. But while the world laughed at his antics, few realized the private drama unfolding behind the curtain. Because Chaplin wasn't just the world's most famous comic actor, he was also a father. Not once, not twice, but 11 times. His children grew up under the long shadow of genius. For some, that shadow was protection. For others, it was a prison. Their lives became as fascinating, and sometimes as tragic, as the characters Chaplin brought to life on screen. To understand these children, we must first understand the man who shaped them. Charlie Chaplin was born in 1889 in the slums of London. His childhood was scarred by hunger, abandonment, and uncertainty. His father, a singer, left when Charlie was very young. His mother, Hannah, suffered from mental illness and was eventually institutionalized. At just 7 years old, Charlie and his half-brother Sidney were sent to a workhouse for destitute children. Poverty wasn't just an obstacle, it was the environment in which Chaplin was forged. But from those bleak beginnings came brilliance. As a boy, Chaplin performed in music halls, dancing and mimicking the world around him. He learned that comedy was more than a distraction, it was survival. By his teenage years, he had joined a troupe that took him across England and eventually to America. Hollywood was still young when Chaplin arrived, but he quickly became its brightest star. In 1914, he introduced the world to the Tramp, a character both funny and heartbreakingly human. The world could not get enough. By his late 20s, Chaplin was not just acting, but writing, directing, producing, and even composing music for his films. He wasn't simply a performer, he was cinema itself. But genius carried its price. Chaplin's personal life was riddled with scandal and controversy. His relationships with women, many much younger than him, made headlines. His marriages were turbulent. He was accused of being un-American during the Red Scare, forced into exile, and barred from returning to the United States for years. And yet, through it all, he created art that stood the test of time. The Kid, City Lights, Modern Times, The Great Dictator. Behind the camera, though, Chaplin longed for stability, a family to anchor his restless genius. He married 4 times, each marriage marked by both passion and turbulence. But it was his final marriage, to Una O'Neill, the daughter of legendary playwright Eugene O'Neill, that gave him the stability he had always sought. Together, they had 8 children, adding to the 3 he had from earlier relationships. 11 children in total, 11 lives touched by brilliance and burden. Some would become actors, dancers, and musicians. Others would retreat into quiet lives far from Hollywood. And one, his very first, would never live to see the world. This is not just the story of Charlie Chaplin, the silent star who made the world laugh. This is the story of his children, the ones who carried his legacy and the ones who struggled beneath its weight. Norman Spencer Chaplin, the tragic firstborn. Charlie's journey into fatherhood began not with joy, but with heartbreak. In 1918, at the height of his fame, Chaplin married actress Mildred Harris. She was just 16, he was 29. The marriage was rocky from the start, fueled by youth, pressure, and Hollywood gossip. When Mildred announced she was pregnant, Charlie, already wary of commitment, was thrust into a reality he wasn't prepared for. Their son, Norman Spencer Chaplin, was born on July 7, 1919, but within just 3 days, the infant was gone. The baby's death shattered the fragile bond between Charlie and Mildred. Though they tried to carry on, grief weighed heavily, and by 1920, the marriage collapsed. Norman Spencer's life was heartbreakingly brief, but his passing left a scar on Chaplin. For all the laughter he gave the world, behind closed doors he had faced the most devastating silence of all, the loss of a child. Yet, life moved on, and just a few years later, Chaplin would find himself a father again. Charles Chaplin Jr., living in the shadow of a legend. In 1924, Chaplin married actress Lita Grey, another young woman whose life became entangled with the most famous man in Hollywood. Their union was turbulent, marked by headlines, lawsuits, and bitter public feuds, but it produced two sons, Charles Jr. and Sidney. The eldest, Charles Spencer Chaplin Jr., was born in 1925. From the beginning, the boy carried the impossible burden of his father's name. Imagine growing up knowing the world didn't just expect you to succeed, it expected you to be a genius. Charles Jr. followed his father into acting, appearing in films like The Beat Generation, 1959, and High School Confidential, 1958. On screen, he showed real talent, but critics and audiences rarely let him stand apart from his father's legacy. His performances were always judged against the gold standard of Charlie Chaplin. Off-screen, life was even more difficult. The divorce between Chaplin and Lita was one of Hollywood's ugliest scandals of the 1920s, and Charles Jr. often found himself caught in the crossfire. Strained family relationships and the relentless weight of expectation drove him to battles with alcohol and personal turmoil. Still, Charles Jr. sought to define himself. In 1960, he published a memoir, My Father, Charlie Chaplin. The book offered an unfiltered view of life with a man worshipped by millions but feared or misunderstood by those closest to him. It was a son's attempt to both honor and expose his father, a deeply conflicted portrait of genius and humanity. Tragically, Charles Jr.'s life was cut short in 1968 when he died of a blood clot at just 42 years old. A man of promise and pain, he remains a symbol of what it meant to grow up in the long, unforgiving shadow of Charlie Chaplin. But Charles Jr.'s younger brother, Sidney, would take a very different path, one that seemed to balance charm, talent, and legacy in a way his brother never could. Sidney Chaplin, the charming brother. Born in 1926, just a year after Charles Jr., Sidney Earl Chaplin carried not only his father's famous surname, but also the name of Chaplin's beloved half-brother and lifelong supporter, Sidney Chaplin Sr. Perhaps that gave him a touch of destiny, because from the start, Sidney seemed to have an ease and charisma that set him apart. While his brother Charles Jr. struggled under the weight of expectation, Sidney found a smoother path. He pursued acting like his father, but unlike Charles Jr., he managed to carve out a name on his own terms. In 1952, Sidney appeared alongside his father in Limelight, a film that was both a personal statement for Charlie Chaplin and a bittersweet farewell to Hollywood. Sidney's performance showed confidence, hinting at a career that could stand without constant comparison. And indeed, his star rose brightest not in film, but on stage. In 1957, Sidney won a Tony Award for his role in Bells Are Ringing on Broadway, where his charm and comic timing won over audiences night after night. He later starred in Funny Girl with Barbra Streisand, showing his ability to hold his own with other legendary performers. Yet, despite his successes, Sidney too faced challenges. The Chaplin name carried expectations, and the world of acting is never without its disappointments. Still, he lived a full career, far longer and steadier than his older brothers. Sidney died in 2009 at the age of 82, remembered as one of the Chaplin children who truly embraced both talent and opportunity. But while Sidney carried the family torch in theater, another Chaplin child, born from Charlie's marriage to Una O'Neill, would dazzle the world on screen in a way that seemed almost inevitable. Geraldine Chaplin, the artistic daughter, Geraldine Lee. Chaplin, born in 1944, was the first child of Charlie and Una, and from the moment she stepped into the public eye, she seemed destined to bridge her father's legacy with a new era of cinema. Her breakout role came in David Lean's epic Dr. Zhivago, 1965, where she played Tanya, the devoted wife. The performance catapulted her into international stardom, proving that talent, not just lineage, ran in her blood. But Geraldine was never content to be defined by Hollywood alone. She embraced European cinema, becoming a muse to Spanish director Carlos Saura. With him, she appeared in films like Cria Cuervos, 1976, earning critical acclaim for her haunting, complex performances. She moved effortlessly between languages and cultures, embodying the cosmopolitan spirit of her parents. Hollywood stardom on one side, literary prestige on the other. Even decades later, Geraldine has remained a respected force in world cinema. She has appeared in dozens of films across genres, from experimental art pieces to mainstream features, and she's not done. Geraldine continues to work, reminding audiences that the Chaplin legacy is alive, evolving, and very much present. But while Geraldine thrived under the spotlight, her younger brother Michael would struggle with it, choosing a more turbulent and unpredictable path. Michael Chaplin, the troubled writer. Born in 1946, Michael Chaplin was the second child of Charlie and Una. Where Geraldine seemed to embrace her inheritance of performance and fame, Michael wrestled with it. From an early age, he carried the Chaplin name like a heavy stone, impossible to put down, impossible to ignore. Michael dabbled in acting, appearing in films such as The Sandwich Man, 1966. But his performances never brought him the satisfaction or acclaim that Geraldine enjoyed. Acting for him was more of an experiment than a calling. Instead, Michael was drawn toward writing, searching for a way to express the complex emotions of growing up in such an unusual family. But personal struggles often overshadowed his creative ambitions. Michael clashed with his father, and their relationship was strained at times, with Charlie's strict expectations colliding against Michael's rebellious streak. Alcohol became both an escape and a problem, fueling the turbulence that defined much of his youth. Still, Michael found a voice. He wrote novels, including A Fallen God and I Couldn't Smoke the Grass on My Father's Lawn, works that revealed a man wrestling with identity, expectation, and the strange mixture of privilege and pain that came with being Charlie Chaplin's son. Though he never reached the fame of his sister Geraldine, Michael's writings stand as a testament to his attempts to define himself beyond the shadow of a legend. Josephine Chaplin, the quiet performer. Born in 1949, Josephine Chaplin seemed to carry a different kind of spirit. Where some of her siblings fought for identity in the spotlight, Josephine approached it with quiet strength. She appeared in several films, including Shadow Man, 1974, The Canterbury Tales, 1972, and Escape to the Sun, 1972. On screen, she displayed a natural presence, though she never sought the relentless pursuit of stardom. Instead, Josephine treated acting as part of her life, not the definition of it. Much of her adult life was spent in Europe, away from the blinding lights of Hollywood. She raised 3 children of her own and dedicated herself to family, returning occasionally to cinema, but never with the intensity of her siblings. Josephine's passing in 2023 was a reminder of how quietly she had lived, despite carrying one of the most famous names in entertainment history. Her life reflected resilience, dignity, and balance, qualities often lost in the whirlwind of fame. Her story reminds us that not every Chaplin child needed the stage or screen to find meaning. Some chose family, stability, and a quieter kind of legacy. But the next Chaplin daughter, Victoria, would take her father's gift for performance and transform it into something entirely new, something magical, and something few could have predicted. Victoria Chaplin, the circus dreamer. Born in 1951, Victoria Chaplin carried her father's creative spark but expressed it in a form uniquely her own. While Hollywood might have seemed like the natural path for a daughter of Charlie Chaplin, Victoria chose something more unconventional, more magical, the circus. From an early age, she had a fascination with theater, performance, and illusion. In the late 1960s, she married French actor Jean-Baptiste Thierry, and together the couple became pioneers of a new kind of performance art. They created Le Cirque Bonjour in 1971, followed later by Le Cirque Imaginaire and Le Cirque Invisible. These weren't traditional circuses with animals and spectacle, but dreamlike worlds of acrobatics, theater, and visual poetry. Victoria herself was a performer, acrobatic, whimsical, and enchanting. Her creative vision helped reimagine what a circus could be: intimate, artistic, and deeply human. The troupe toured across Europe, building a reputation for innovation and wonder. The Chaplin magic was alive, but in a way no one could have predicted. And it didn't stop with Victoria. Her son, James Thierry, became one of the most acclaimed modern circus and theater performers of his generation, winning awards for his breathtaking blend of dance, mime, and acrobatics. Through Victoria, Charlie Chaplin's spirit of reinvention found a new stage under the circus tent. Eugene Chaplin, the technical artist. Born in 1953, Eugene Chaplin inherited his father's love for the arts, but found his niche behind the microphone instead of in front of the camera. While his siblings sought the spotlight, Eugene discovered his passion in sound engineering and music. He worked as a recording engineer with some of the biggest names in music, including the Rolling Stones, Queen, and David Bowie. For Eugene, the studio was a place of artistry every bit as significant as a film set. He had a sharp ear and a quiet creativity, shaping the sounds that defined an era. Later, Eugene also turned to directing, creating documentaries about his father, and preserving the Chaplin legacy for future generations. He became president of the International Comedy Film Festival in Switzerland, dedicated to celebrating the art form his father had elevated to genius. Unlike many of his siblings, Eugene rarely sought the spotlight. Instead, he became a guardian of the Chaplin name, ensuring that the laughter and innovation his father gave the world would never be forgotten. But while Eugene worked behind the curtain, the next generation of Chaplin children, Jane, Annette, and Christopher, would each take their own paths, ranging from quiet domestic lives to bold artistic endeavors. And among them, the youngest son would carry the Chaplin name into the realm of music and composition, transforming legacy into sound. Jane Chaplin, the quiet daughter. Born in 1957, Jane Chaplin grew up in Switzerland during her father's later years, when Charlie had finally stepped away from the chaos of Hollywood. Unlike some of her siblings, Jane leaned toward privacy rather than performance. She did appear in a handful of films, including Remembering Chaplin and A Countess from Hong Kong, but she never sought out the demands of a full career in acting. Her life was shaped more by family than by the need to keep the Chaplin name in lights. Jane often expressed that she valued peace over prestige, and in many ways her decision reflected wisdom. She understood the double-edged sword of legacy and chose a quieter road. Her story is important precisely because it contrasts so strongly with others in the Chaplin family. Not every child of a legend needs to live loudly to matter. Annette Chaplin, the steady performer. Annette Chaplin, born in 1959, found herself somewhere in between her more private and more public siblings. She pursued acting, largely in Europe, where the Chaplin family had settled in Vevey, Switzerland. Annette appeared in theater productions and films, carrying on her father's creative spark without chasing international stardom. She was deeply rooted in Switzerland, not only because of family ties, but also because of her dedication to the Chaplin Museum, Chaplin's World, which opened in 2016 in their old estate, Manoir de Ban. Through her quiet commitment to both the arts and her father's memory, Annette became a steward of the Chaplin legacy, ensuring that visitors from around the world could connect with the man behind the tramp. Christopher Chaplin, the composer. The youngest of the 11 children, Christopher James Chaplin, was born in 1962, when Charlie was already 73 years old. For Christopher, his father was not just legendary, he was elderly, more of a monumental figure than an active parent. At first, Christopher experimented with acting, but it never felt like home. Instead, he turned to music, and in time, he found his calling as a composer. His works leaned toward the avant-garde, blending classical and experimental forms into haunting soundscapes. Albums like Je suis le ténébreux and collaborations with contemporary ensembles showed that Christopher was less interested in echoing the past than in carving a bold new identity. In a sense, Christopher closed the circle of Chaplin creativity. Where Charlie had once composed music for his silent films, Christopher reimagined music as his own voice, ensuring the Chaplin family would continue innovating into the 21st century. But as the children grew, each walking their own path, the question remained, how would they carry the immense legacy of their father? And what would the world remember most? A legacy written in 11 lives. On Christmas Day, 1977, the curtain finally fell on Charlie Chaplin's extraordinary life. He died peacefully at his home in Switzerland, surrounded by Una and the children who were still young enough to live at home. The world mourned not just a comedian, but an artist who had redefined cinema, a man whose tramp had walked straight into history. But his story didn't end there. It lived on in the 11 lives he left behind. Through Geraldine's commanding performances on the world stage, Michael's raw and restless words, Victoria's dreamlike circuses, Eugene's devotion to music and preservation, and Christopher's daring compositions, the Chaplin name found new forms of expression. Through Charles Jr. and Sidney, audiences saw the first attempts of Chaplin's children to carry their father's light, each with triumphs and struggles. Through Josephine, Jane, and Annette, the quieter but equally important branches of the family kept his memory alive in their own ways. Some thrived under the spotlight, some rejected it, and one, little Norman Spencer, never lived long enough to know the burden or the blessing of being Chaplin's child. Together, their stories remind us that legacy is never simple. For every award, every standing ovation, there are sacrifices, struggles, and shadows. Charlie Chaplin may have belonged to the world, but to his children he was something else: father, guide, mystery, and sometimes an impossible standard. And perhaps that is the real untold story, that behind every icon there is a family whose story deserves to be heard. If you enjoyed this journey into the lives of Charlie Chaplin's children, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more untold stories, and keep watching, because we have many more hidden family histories of Hollywood legends waiting to be uncovered.